Welcome back to another episode of In the Doghouse, a podcast by the Underdogs Athletics crew. Minus Brendan, I feel like we have to have him on at some point, but his nursing career is taking him away from what is much more important work here on our podcast. But have no fear, joined as always by the Dakota. I don't actually say your last name. I don't know if you know this, but I'm still a little uncertain about where the emphasis goes in your last name, so I choose to avoid.
It's okay. I think it still might be misspelled in a couple spots as well.
Well, is it Shackleton?
It's Shackleton, yeah.
Okay, is it L-E or E-L?
L-E, like a shackle that weighs a ton.
Shackleton. Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Dakota Shackleton and the one and only Justin Kotler joining us, not from his own bedroom. What's going on, Jay?
You know.
What? So
interesting few weeks.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to kind of like debrief in your head at all from Rogue, or have you been totally turned a different direction? Because this can lead the conversation today in two different ways. One, I can take you down memory lane of Rogue, or two, you can kind of like give us a little insight into the things you've been thinking and feeling since it.
I've done a little bit of debriefing. I have not done my normal go back and watch every single event again and make notes, and which I usually do multiple times. But I have thought about the events, and obviously specifically how they relate to Ricky and Alex, and what they're, what we need to work on, or mistakes that were made that obviously can't be made again. It was very interesting. There were more like equipment and tactical mistakes this time than anything else, which honestly really led to a series of really challenging events, because once, especially for Ricky, once his hands were beat up, the rest of the weekend was really hard for him. I think people could be like, oh, it's an excuse, but like, you take a look at what happened with the monkey bar event, right? And then it was like this, once that snowball started down the mountain, then the next event had all the muscle ups and snatches in it, right? Which he could barely hold on to. And then you had a deadlift event, which ripped the hell out of the inside of his hands. It was like this just one thing after another that started because of the equipment error with the grips. But that's something we can obviously talk about.
Did he even have a little bit of carryover from the log? I mean, that was like 45 muscle ups on that big, thick log.
Yeah, there was no issue with that.
There?
Literally all was because of the monkey bars. But yeah, Keith, I mean, in general, I would love to go through the events, because I think it'd be great to kind of take a look at each one of them and, kind of recap them, because I haven't really, done that, obviously, with some of the personal stuff that I'm dealing with, with my dad and whatnot. So it's be good to kind of talk about, and from everyone's perspective, I think, talk a little bit about the events and how things went specifically for Underdogs athletes, and how we felt about the events in general. Because I think you and I will have, some feelings about, the pulling, etc. I mean, I saw it today. There was an article already about the excessive pulling on day 3, I think, which was Saturday, which we can talk about some more. But yeah, you want to lead it?
Yeah, I mean, as people I'm sure are aware, the competition started off day 1, just a single event. Something that I think we all assumed was coming with GoRuck being a partner, and with the tendencies from Rogue, was some sort of weighted running piece. And so I think almost everybody was preparing for it and training it, but it also ended up being heavier than I think anybody expected. But I feel like, and you tell me what you think, Justin, like, so the event was 1 mile in a ruck backpack with a sandbag on top that made it 100 pounds total for men, 80 pounds total for women. Then you took it off. You had 800 meters just in a ruck, 45 and 30. And then a 1 mile run to the finish, and then a sandbag pull that was largely like inconsequential at the end. Didn't really play a lot into the outcomes. But I feel like the initial mile didn't seem to be as big of a difference maker as I thought it might be. meaning I feel like people kind of plugged along in places that they would have otherwise. And then a lot of the difference happened in that transition to the 800. It was like, okay, like, can you kick and run pretty hard in a ruck, or do you have to kind of stay at this slow trot pace that you were at? Do you feel like that was the case, or do you think I'm looking at it wrong?
No, I think you're right for the most part. I do think, specifically speaking for like our athletes, I know afterwards Ricky was surprised at how heavy the
Yeah.
the first mile felt, and I know he said that his legs were pretty cooked even after that, and he felt like, especially for someone who's such a good runner, he felt like he had a real tough time being able to push the mile after the first mile ruck run and the 800-meter ruck. And he felt like if he had really tried to push the mile, he was concerned about how his legs would feel the rest of the weekend.
Right.
So he kind of just settled into the place where he was. I really don't think we saw a lot of fluctuation and a lot of shifting. There was really only one athlete that I can remember that, we looked at and we said, oh, that was a mistake
Right.
on the women's side. And, I love her, but I think Ariel would agree that she probably went out too hot and she ended up really falling back. But besides that, there wasn't a ton of fluctuation other than just watching Jeff very meticulously pick off everybody, which I thought was very impressive. He's turned into an elite runner, obviously. I think that was on, that was on display in this event where he paced the mile ruck beautifully and then just, started to creep up, and then obviously pass everyone in that mile run, which was incredibly impressive. But yeah, I mean, speaking specifically for our athletes, I thought Ricky would do a little bit better. Obviously, 8th wasn't bad, but I felt like he'd have a top 5 on that. And I think it was funny because when he got done, he just looked at me. He was like, I've been squatting too much. I can't run anymore.
Yeah. Which, I mean, when we talk about Friday, though, and him coming back and winning an event with heavy back squats in it, whether or not you could argue that the muscle ups or the back squats are more important, like him with less strong legs doesn't win that workout most likely. And so there's certainly a
100%.
trade-off to be made. But it's also just a testament to the field. Like, I feel like, especially on the men's side, like everybody is such a good runner now that you can't get away with, Brent said this a year or two ago when he started doing more running again. Fikowski is like, when he came into the sport, he won all the long endurance events, and then he stopped working on it to get stronger. And all of a sudden he was having middle of the pack finishes, and like the field has just leveled up in that regard. And then I think when you put on a ruck and you make things heavier, it brings a lot of different aspects into play in terms of, athlete overall size, where you saw some really light athletes on men's and women's side just struggle to keep moving because of the external load. And then just, the amount of training exposure you're able to have with that, whether that's, a long-term thing, like somebody like Chandler, who spent a lot of time rucking with his time in the Army, or people who just had longer periods of training and preparing for this, as opposed to somebody like Bailey, who is, Bailey's a phenomenal runner, but also happens to be on the lighter side, and also took a decent amount of time off after the games, and self-admittedly did not do any of the ruck training we planned going into it. So for him, it was just like, no matter how good of a runner he is, his body with that much external load he was not able to like control his heart rate, not able to stay stable and just work through that event.
Yeah. And it would obviously, if you hadn't, I think leading in, if you hadn't prepared, it really punished you, and it really punished you anyway. It didn't really matter
for sure.
But in general, I thought it was fine. I think we knew it was coming. Obviously, spectator wise, it's not an extremely spectator friendly event, but I think, and Rogue always tends to go over the top with a lot of this stuff.
I thought this year was way better than last year as a spectator, though, because it was on site, so you're able to actually see it. And the way they broke it down into 3 laps meant that you could actually see them come in each time. You could see the placings people were in when they went from the heavy ruck to the light ruck to no ruck. So it was certainly better. And the overall time domain wasn't so long that it was like obnoxious to watch. But I don't know, Dakota, what do you think about something like that, having watched it from home?
I was about to say, as a spectator from home, so I had the extended coverage where I got to see a few different camera angles. Now, the run was the one event where they hadn't had anything set up. So really, I mean, I know that Jeffrey kind of hunted down Jelly Toast. And they talked about that a lot. I mean, they pretty much had the camera on Tia the whole time, was talking about her. They mentioned Ariel's fall off, but really besides that, I got to see a lot of those two. And then pretty much once people got to the bags, I saw people pulling the bags. So it was hard to really get a grasp on what was kind of happening in the middle of the pack. And it was definitely nice throughout the rest of the weekend, getting to see different angles, different camera views, getting to listen to the, the chalk talk on a different camera. In addition to having the regular view that everyone got to see on YouTube.
One more thing about this event I'd like to bring up is I would have loved to have seen the sled back pull to finish actually mean something.
Yeah.
I think it would have been great if it would have been maybe a 175 or a 200-pound bag.
Just do it every round. They came in 3 times. If they pulled it all 3 times, I think it would have mattered a lot more, because your legs are going to blow up. You're going to see people either resting there from the run or choosing to push that. I think that would have been awesome.
Because there's really only about 50 yards.
Yeah. And I heard a lot of chatter about it also not being the length that they talked about. Every single man finished a 100-pound ruck in under 8:15. It just seemed like that.
Yeah, the mile seemed like it might have been a little short, but
yeah.
You know what? Those things don't bug me that much, though. There was, I guess, I understand it on the 5K at the games, and they talk about a global 5K and having everybody do it. Like, that's a massive F up if it's not 5K, because we're trying to essentially use that as a benchmark for everybody's CrossFit.com profile. But for this, I couldn't give 2 shits if it's
normally I don't,
or 1400.
Yeah, normally I don't think people would. I think just as a piggyback off of that just recently happening, that now that's going to be something that people are going to continue to badger and talk about. They're like, oh, it was 100 meters short. It's like the runners are still going to win that. It doesn't really play into it.
Yeah.
Cool. But I actually liked, going into day 2, Friday, the first traditional event day. I liked the way that we transitioned from that heavy monostructural event into some pretty high skill, pretty heavy, couplets, CrossFit type of events. I thought that the log muscle up and back squat workout was really cool. Both last year and this year, I loved the fact that they had back squats in the competition. I liked that it was heavy. I liked that it brings in a strength element without it being a 1 rep max.
Is it not significant enough?
It still feels like something. It's 99% of the field is doing it unbroken. So in that sense, it doesn't show as much separation as I would like for it to. Now, I guess the argument is probably you still see either the strongest or the best gymnasts win the event anyway, but I just feel like we have one more step to go to make it I want to see people wondering if they're going to fail a rep and having to actually think about that and plan things out.
I mean, they did last year.
Yeah.
Last year's load, I think they did. I actually thought this year's load was pretty good. I mean, there were still some people that really struggled. They may not have failed. You had a couple people that had to break up the sets. And you had some people that I expected to just blast through that really did have to think about the set, And I like the log muscle up. I think it's very cool. I thought it was interesting because especially on the men's side where they could string multiples together, it was interesting to see how people broke it up, especially at the beginning. Because you saw a lot of people that were very aggressive the first round who came out in the second round and did their first one. And it was like, oh shit,
it would be to me a really cool, I love the log muscle up too. The big sets sometimes are tough for me because it's so much time standing there doing singles or doubles. I feel like it would be a super cool event to do is something like 9 rounds of 3 muscle ups and 3 back squats. And then you move a pylon each time, because now you have to really think about if you could do unbroken sets or if you're doing singles. But even if you do singles, you're not spending 90 seconds standing at the log, and you see a lot of transition across the floor. I think that to me would be cool, because now you see all right, if you're Alex or you're Kyra or you're Laura Horvath or you're one of the really strong squatters, you see them run up to the bar, hit the squat, go back, as opposed to somebody that's using a walking transition throughout it. But I like the movements. I like the combo. I like the trend of using back squats in competition that they've started there.
And really and truly, if we think about it, that's really the only event for the rest of the weekend that wasn't affected by rain. Yeah. I mean, And the truth is, if it had started raining prior to that, that would have been screwed too. There's no way they'd have been able to do log muscle ups in the rain. So
Yeah.
that was nice at least to get one of those. And obviously all of our athletes did unbelievably well. We had 2 event wins, and I think everyone was a top 6
we had we on the men's side we had a first and a third, and on the women's side a first and a sixth. That was a good event.
Awesome. Yeah. Super cool.
Okay, so you've talked definitely already on a couple platforms about the killer cage, about the monkey bars and the rain and people's hands ripping and whatnot. Taking a step back from it, just the workout. Do you like the workout? No rain, perfect scenario. What do you think of this setup?
I think it should have either been heavier shoulder to overhead, or there should have been more reps shoulder to overhead.
Totally agree.
And other than that, I liked it. I thought maybe it should be because it was only was it 3 rounds?
Yep.
Yeah. So if it was 3 rounds, it should have been, in my opinion, either 120 and 85 or maybe 120 and 90, something like that on the if it was 5 and 5, or they should have gone 10 and 10 for the shoulder to overhead every round.
That's what I thought.
And I think that would have been much better.
And because if you watch, I don't know, Dakota, what this was like at home watching, but if you watch people there, it was almost unanimously a pretty smooth and easy 5 unbroken, unless you were struggling with it slipping on your shoulder because of the rain. It was not limited by people's strength. It was only limited by, like, if you could get a good grip, or, if you learn to do a strongman grip where it's supposed to sit in the crook of your neck, well, it's raining and all of a sudden you couldn't do that and it was slipping a little bit.
And personally, I couldn't see a whole lot of struggle with that particular element of the rain. Right. For the most part, it looked like everyone was just manhandling it. Yeah. And the circus dumbbell is potentially a little bit awkward, but if you knew that there was potentially a strongman implement coming up and you had your hands on it once, I think 170 is just, it's pretty standard for what most people are using in Metcons.
Yeah. And the monkey bars I thought that this year compared to last year, the monkey bars were much more relevant. Yeah. Obviously the rain made it even more so in a different way, but the length of it and the fact that it was supposed to be unbroken and it was a down and back, I feel like had we seen that in dry conditions, between the ski and the dumbbell going into that it would have been like a pretty significant component. It would have been a lot of fun to watch. That ended up kind of getting ruined a bit, but still a cool implement to have.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked him. It's just unfortunate, I think, that the rain had so much of an effect on things, and but at the end of the day, and this is something obviously I spoke to Ricky and Alex about in the moment, and something we'll talk about more when we kind of debrief about these things, is that everybody had to deal with it, and some people dealt with it better, and you have to be prepared for it. And in my opinion, if you make a mistake with a grip, that's on you. If you make a mistake not wearing grips, it's on you. You can't make those type of errors, because we see in a 9 event in a 9 event competition, it's you get a 19th, and it's tough. You can't at that point in time. I mean, Ricky's battled back to finish 5th, but I mean, if you make this 19th, where he normally would get a 5th, or better, and I think he might have won the event if he actually had the correct grips. But even if you make it a 5th or a 6th, he's on the podium. So that's a tough pill to swallow when you're done. When you look at yourself and say, I made an equipment error and it cost me a possible podium. So these are all things that at the end of the day, you can't make those type of errors. And so these are things we'll continuously discuss, and eventually, you learn from them. I mean, that's the best you can do.
For sure. Now, so end of Friday, we're 3 events in, third of the way into the competition, but plenty far enough for everybody to start to panic about what's going on. Because no matter how much people know that it's a long weekend, you get a couple events in and people start to get anxious. What's your perspective on Alex and Ricky, where they're at, how the weekend's going to shape up?
I was worried more so about Ricky than I was about Alex that night, because Ricky was really pissed off. Yeah. And he was pissed off in the sense of he came into the event in his mind saying, I'm winning this event, right?
Yep.
And when you have a finish like that, especially when you're tied for first going into that event, where you're like, okay, I got an 8th and a 1st. I'm right where I want to go, and I'm right where I want to be. And I have an event I'm licking my chops about. And you come out and you finish 19th in an event that you think is essentially like is a wheelhouse event. I was very concerned about him just being like, well, fuck it, I can't win now, so I'm gonna mail it in. But he didn't, he didn't, obviously, because he's a warrior. But I was concerned about where he was, especially after I spoke to Benny, because Benny was like, man, I spoke to him and he's really deflated after that event. So I was concerned about it. But at the same time, I feel like I think we know how good he is. And, it's almost like when he shows up, he's got a great opportunity to do extremely well in most events. So as long as he was willing to battle, he was going to come back. You know what I mean? But I was more concerned about him at that moment, than I was even about Alex, because I felt like there were a couple of events that were coming up for Alex that were like, she could win that event. So, but yeah, that was my biggest concern, was just where was Ricky's mental state at after that event.
I was in a very different position, honestly, most of the weekend, but especially going into that, because the two people I was working with, Bailey and Kyra, have fairly different expectations from what Alex and Ricky have. I think Bailey's expectations at this point are that he wants and believes he can be top 10 in any competition he goes to, because he finished 12th at the games. He kind of like finally got over that hump. He showed how talented he is. But at the same time, like, we knew that he hadn't trained a whole lot going into this. Right. And so the first event was kind of a kick in the ass for both of them. One for Bailey, more so because it was a pride hit, because he is a good runner, but it just kind of showed that, like, you can't rely on being a good runner and not having trained for something. And for Kyra, it was something where running is the thing we spent the most time preparing for. And we spent a lot of time in a ruck. And to finish 19th in that event, to her, primarily because she's been dealing with shin splints for a while. Shins blew up, couldn't push. She wasn't frustrated by 19th. She was frustrated by the fact that she was fit enough to go faster, but felt like she couldn't move faster. And she's not a person that's going to take top 10 in that workout, but her finishing 15th in that versus 19th is a huge win for where she's at as a runner. And so that was frustrating. But then they both finished really well in the second event. Both of them managed killer cage pretty well, came out without any rips. And so for us, it was like, okay, like little downs, little ups. We're in a pretty good spot. It's pretty smooth going into the weekend, knowing that there's a couple of events on paper that I knew both of them could do super well on going through the weekend.
Yep.
This ring muscle up event to start Saturday, I felt like was the hardest workout of the weekend.
Well, well, it certainly was for Ricky and Alex. I felt like
Bailey and Kyra got kicked in the face by it too, but just the amount of volume, the number of rounds, the amount of hinging, the shoulder fatigue for 40 muscle ups to be the easiest part of a workout, to me, is like, that's a tough workout.
Yeah, I mean, I was really concerned in warm ups because Ricky could barely grip the bar on the snatches because of how ripped his hands were. And he actually did okay on the workout. I don't think he did nearly as well as he would have done without. But I'll be honest with you, he got incredibly fortunate when he went out on the floor. They let him use his grips to do snatches. Mm-hmm. He asked when he was on the floor, can I use my grips? Because he had his hands taped up, but he was concerned he wasn't going to be able to use his grips on the snatches, and he could barely grip the bar. He was just grimacing on every single snatch. Wow. Alex wanted no part of this workout. I knew it from I mean, I just, and unfortunately, and you know what? She was very honest about, her wrist was bothering her, but it really wasn't about that. It was about the fact that, she doesn't like snatches. She had to do so many snatches. The wrist was kind of bothering her for all three of these, and she just felt sorry for herself and really took a massive hit on this event. But I think this was the turning point for her, because I think she realized after this event that it was essentially like, I feel sorry for myself, but no one else fucking cares. Like, if I go out there and I keep finishing 16th and 18th on these workouts, like, I'm going to end up at the end of the weekend and I'm going to look back and be like, well, shit, like, that's all on me. It's nobody else's fault but my own. You know what I mean? So I think this was a big turning point for her because when this workout was done, we had a conversation. And I said to her, hey, listen, I know your wrist is hurting, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You went out on the floor. If you go out on the floor, no one wants to hear about your wrist. And the same thing with Ricky. It's like, no one wants to hear about your hands. Like, here's the deal. After this workout, there were 500 points left. And it was basically like, you got to put everything out there now to battle to try to finish where you want to finish, and where you want to finish is top 5. And, right now, after this event, she was in 12th. It was like, okay, what are you going to do? And this was a turning point for her after this event. I think she put her big girl pants on in the rest of the weekend and really did a phenomenal job from that point on.
Yeah, I think from after this workout on, and, for them personally during that workout, this weekend was probably a really big test for some of our athletes or younger athletes or many people there of like, there's a lot of shit you can't control that's happening to everybody, whether you know about it or not. Everybody's dealing with something. And usually It's like people in private have their back injury or their shoulder or their wrist, and it is what it is. But at this, it was like, it's raining, events are getting delayed. You don't know when you're going to go. Events are changing. All of a sudden there's no rope climb in the second workout and stuff. It's like, there's a lot of stuff that we can't control. And all you can really control is the fact that you have to be prepared to go out on the floor and compete when it's time to do it. And everybody has to. And you see it time and time again that the people that are most adaptable and most kind of willing to accept change and just roll with the punches perform the best as those things go on. And the other athletes continue to just crumble and make more and more excuses as that happens.
Yeah. And I also think, what I think is interesting about most of the competitions that we coach at and that our athletes compete in is once the momentum starts going the wrong direction, can you switch it? Can you flip it? That's a very hard thing to do. And I think that was something that you see a lot of, like, the best athletes and people who when they compete, those that end up always in the top 5 or always in the top 10, they just have a way of being able to flip things. So this was a good opportunity to be able to learn and say, hey, like, the momentum may be going the other way, but I'm the only one who can change that. Like, I'm the only one who can flip that. So go ahead, Dakota.
It sounds like that was a major win for Alex then, because I know talking to her, leading up to the event, getting to train together a few extra times, like in between her Hawaii trip and prepping and having a wrist. And I even saw her post on Instagram about like the events being a little later in the day than she was used to. And I mean, it seemed like there was the potential for that bad snowball of momentum to kind of feed and let yourself just kind of throw away some events. But besides this ring muscle up one, it sounds like she really got her shit together. And obviously we know what happened later on in the evening, but
I think this next event, and I'll let Kiefer go through this next event, but I think this was the start of her being able to really rally. I mean, there were a lot of events left, and it was one of those things that you had to be able to pick yourself up and create some momentum. Especially like Kiefer was talking about with the adversity of, like, there was supposed to be a road climb in this. And then when they start taking out things that are like strengths of yours, now you start to feel like, oh shit, well, not only did this happen, but now they're taking away like my wheelhouse stuff. Right. And so it's easier to make those type of excuses.
And that's like, you take a competition in Rogue that is unlike any other competition in the caliber of athlete and how small the field is. Mm-hmm. In any other competition you go to, if you take like second to last as a games athlete or nearly games athlete, you feel like you're a total failure. If you take 18th in a workout at Rogue, well, that could very well be 18th at the games also, which at the games is top half of the field, but at Rogue it's second to last. And so it's such a mental game to go there, because I know that everybody there is too competitive and has too much pride to want to take a bottom finish. And you could have a workout that like you're reasonably decent at in the grand scheme of things. And you could take a second to last and you look at the leaderboard and all of a sudden, like you're feeling bad for yourself about that. And so the momentum shifts so quickly at the competition and the leaderboard shifts so quickly. When we saw that like event 1, 2, 3, 4, things were all over the place on both sides that you have to learn to be really resilient and really mature very quickly. But going into event 5, I was bummed about this because I really wanted to see it with a rope climb. I wanted to see how it looked. Honestly, there was definitely some cool, very athletic highlights that came from this, but it felt very underwhelming and very one-sided in that, like, by the time you got towards the end of the bracket, it was just really big athletic athletes on both sides that did the best. And that's not a knock on them at all. It's not saying that those sorts of workouts shouldn't exist. It's just that we saw one thing on paper originally and I was excited for that. And when you have to get over a high log, under another one, over a high log, and then sprint down to 3 heavy sandbags, it pays to be a big athlete, right? But if you put a rope climb in the middle and you add a gymnastics component that also has a bit of execution in it and it slows down that piece, I think you get a lot more mix up in the field and you get a little bit more, there's more opportunities for people to gain and lose ground. So instead of being like, who's first getting towards the sandbag coming off the log, and you assume that they're going to be first at the end, now you have to wonder what's going to happen. I obviously had personal vested interest in it staying that way because I think that Kyra would have done really well had that been in there, being good at rope climbs. She's athletic, but she's not quite as big as the other girls, and she was a step too slow, and she ended up being about a second and a half shy of making it into the second round of it. It was definitely fun to watch, but like I even think Alex, as well as she did, would have done better if there's a rope climb in it, you know?
Totally agree. And I think our boys would have too, because they're both phenomenal rope climbs. I mean, I think both of us agree this would have been a perfect time for a legless rope climb. You know, you throw in a legless rope climb in this event, I think it changes up the leaderboard immensely. And I also think it adds an element of excitement that the fans would have loved to see. And I actually, you know, I mean, we were there. They could have easily left the rope climb. And it was during a period of time when it was sunny out and there was no rain. There was no reason for them to take it out. So at the end of the day, it is what it is. I will say I was incredibly impressed with Danny Spiegel's athleticism through the logs. And I know obviously she was going to kill the sandbag, but to see her speed through the logs and her ability to be able to attack the logs, I thought was awesome to watch. And obviously Paige Semenza, who wasn't quite as good on the bags, but wow, it was fun to watch her, you know, through the logs. Like,
it is
you
cool.
were like, oh man, that's an
It
athlete.
is. Seeing stuff like that makes me hope that we do more obstacle sprint type stuff at more competitions going forward. Of course, it's come up a couple times in the game, sometimes just linear sprinting stuff though, but like you see that, and I think that has a bigger relatability factor to a general consumer who may have played sports than some CrossFit workouts do. Like if you see how athletic they can be at that, you're like, oh wow, CrossFitters move pretty well. But if you just see a CrossFit workout that maybe as an outsider you don't relate to as well, I think that that's tough. So I think like there's a lot of street cred that comes from those sorts of events.
Yeah, that was one of the times as I was watching it on my computer. I mean, granted, it felt like a very long event and a lot of time in between, but they had some sick shots. You just see it from the side and sometimes from the front as well. I mean, these guys were girls too, just flying over these logs, and actually talked about it a few times. The not just athleticism of being able to do it, but the adaptability of figuring out which way was the best way to get over the log. I mean, some of the guys even talked about floating too much, right? Getting too high over the log, where if you could kind of glide over it and get your foot in the ground and take that one step advantage, and you could see it throughout the rounds. You could definitely tell who was taking notes of every step counts. And actually, if you watched the final round of the guys, I mean, they literally were in sync every single step, like 3 steps in between, right leg over, 4 steps to the next one. It was very cool.
Okay, so here's I am opting, I'm making an executive decision for us. Instead of spending much time talking about the deadlift, because it's pretty straightforward and we all have the same opinion about the jumps being too small and having to do too many reps, and it doesn't make sense for somebody who's out first to do 18 less reps than the person that wins and gets punished by it. And on the women's side, our girls did amazing. On the guys' side, our dudes are not quite as strong of deadlifters, and that is what it is. Instead of all of that I just sprinted through, I want an opinion piece on top 5 athletes getting a bye in the first round of an event like that. Now scroll back up, Stroka.
That's what I was gonna say too.
I think I find it.
I didn't like that.
So I asked Travis Mayer about this in the back, and I said, Travis, do you think it is an advantage or a disadvantage? Because there's the argument of like, oh, the first round is kind of like the buy-in, and people get a feel for how to pace after that. But Travis is like, that is absolutely an advantage because all of us are human and subject to making a mistake. And you have 5 people now that are guaranteed a better placing than the rest of the field because they don't have to go through that first round.
And if you look at it, I mean, you had podium guys in the 12th, 13th, 14th placement in that event. Correct. So that could have been, an additional
They could have been 18th, 17th, 19th. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that they're guaranteed more points. That's not fair. I don't think that that's the way they should do it. I'm not a fan of the bye.
You've only done 4 events at that point. So it's not like you're doing it on Sunday after 7 or 8 events. And it's truly like at this point, the people that are in the running for top 5 fittest, it's just you're halfway through a competition and these people happen to be a little bit further ahead right now.
I have to say, though, I'm not a huge I just feel like these events take forever. And the fact that they whittle it down to 2 people, I just think that you should that final 5 should be the final. I don't think you need to go down. I know it's called a duel, but at the end of the day, it takes forever. It pushes back the schedule. I don't think it's necessary. So I'm fine from it going. From if you want to do 20 to 15, 15 to 10, 10 to 5, that's fine. I actually would rather see it go 20 to 10, 10 to 5, and then finished. Yeah. But I agree with you. I don't like the bye at all. I don't like that you're guaranteeing people points.
Here's what I think for next year. I think this would be sweet. I hope Rogue is listening. You find a way to do an event that's full heat of 20 women and then full heat of 20 men. You whittle each down to the top 10 now. You put them all in the field again. You go the top 20 men and women together. They do another round. Then you take the top 5 from that and you do a final round. So you get to see men versus women in this duel at the same time. They have their respective things, but you get to see them all at the same time in an event that's crafted in a way that you can see a comparative athleticism of men and women together. And I think that would have a really cool outcome. And it's exciting.
And it would save time.
Sure. Yes. They'd all be out on the field together doing it. Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
Do you let them run the 5K or, there's been events where they've run long events together. So why not do it with the sprint?
I think it would be awesome.
The only other thing I'd like to say is just about the entirety of the day and how much pulling
and hinging.
Rogue needs to really take a look at the programming and you just looked at, I think Barbell Spin did their article today about the discrepancy in some of the work that some did and some of the others. But regardless, the potential for you, even, to this much pulling on one day is ridiculous. It's just way too much.
And it didn't end there. You come back Sunday morning, everybody's backs are fried except for a couple people who we won't name that didn't do very many deadlifts or any. And then you have to do...
How do you get away with that?
And then you have to do 40 ground overhead with heavy implements.
There needs to be a minimum work requirement. I hate to say that, but God Almighty, you can't. How can you just opt out to not do a lift?
It's just a format.
There was athletes that didn't do any back squats.
Well, my thing is, you know what? If you choose not to do a lift and you want to continue in the competition, then fine, you can continue the competition. But now your scores don't count. And you're automatically 20th.
Scaled.
Like you automatically, you now are 20. You finished 20. Like
this is no different. I'll use Kyra as an example. She took 19th in the run. We could have assumed going into a run that maybe like 15th is would have been an exciting finish. So it's like, all right, I could take a bottom 5 in this, or I could not do it at all, be totally fresh going into Saturday. And if somebody did that, nobody would be okay with it.
So is
No.
this a
Nobody
Justin?
would be okay with saying, I'm just going to show up on Friday instead. If Danny Spiegel goes, I'm going to show up on Friday instead, fresh and ready for this, they'd be pissed when she wins the strength event.
Does
But if
that
somebody
mean-
doesn't do a single deadlift, nobody says a word when that person comes back and takes top 5 in Sunday morning's event.
Does that mean the Justin Kotler hot take of the day is that Roman shouldn't have still got his position at the CrossFit Games?
You know
Like,
what?
does-
Roman still tried. Roman was still out there doing things.
Okay.
That if you go back and take a look, he was doing double unders with a
Yeah.
single leg. Like he was still pushing out there.
And
You
then
know?
there's something like he pushed on that. And then the final would be the first one where I would say he wouldn't have met maybe a minimum work requirement.
He had
Which,
done 14
in a sense,
events.
you could have said at
Or
that
11.
point, like, okay,
Yeah.
had there been another event, we can't let him continue because of this. But it was the last event anyway.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that one's a tricky one because I just
You're
think of,
talking
I mean,
about
I think of
this
the
is
football.
middle of the event. You had someone
Yeah.
who decided not to do 2 movements on that on the first 2 days. Like just
I'm just
didn't
playing
do 'em.
devil's advocate. I'm on your side.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
you know
This
what?
is not this is not a hit on a person. It's just a conversation starter for competition.
So
Because
here's
if you're
what Rogue
gonna
did
put
in
people through that much,
2019. Here's what Rogue did in 2019.
and then I want to hear Soroka's take.
Yeah, I know he came on screen, so he's got something to say.
In 2019, Rogue had minimum work requirements.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there were a few athletes
Laura.
that could not, that wasn't just Laura, it was Margot Alvarez as well.
Okay.
But there were a few athletes who could not meet the minimum work requirements on a few movements. They let them continue in the competition and they let them compete and they still went, but they automatically took the bottom 2 places.
And those are in
compared to
cases
everyone
where
else.
somebody tried as hard as they can and couldn't do a
Correct.
movement. That
Correct.
is a handstand push-up that you're failing, which would be like if somebody was unracking that back squat over and over and trying to do it and failing it. Not putting their barbell at 135 or 0 pounds and doing air squats.
Correct.
Yeah, 95-pound snatch.
Soroka, go.
No, mine was actually just on that as a question, whereas instead of a minimum work requirement, you at least have to pick up the bar off the rack and attempt it, just like you have to attempt the deadlift. And if you, I mean, but I don't know how you gauge that, right? Because somebody, if they had no intention of actually attempting the squat, like I could just go halfway down and bail, or I could give a fake pull on the deadlift bar and be like, oh, I tried.
They have this as a discretionary rule for the CrossFit Game season. Is basically it's a something to do with like a reasonable effort, and it is at your judge's discretion.
That was the semifinals issue this year
Yes.
with the
Yeah.
rings.
Stroker,
think
what
it's-
I would have done is I would have said, if you cannot hit at least one back squat at 260/370, and you cannot hit the opening weight of the deadlift, here
You take last.
whatever, then you take last. That's it. You don't meet the minimum work requirement. You take last in the competition. But I'm not kicking you out of the competition. We've flown you to Texas. Compete the rest of the time. Go out there and have some fun. Because at the end of the day, you're
And they
still
still
making
make $6,000.
$6,000. 100%.
So
And
you
you know
last
what?
in the whole event, or sorry, not just the event. I mean,
competition.
obviously you would
Entire
take
event,
last,
you're
but
now
the
down
whole.
at the bottom.
Okay,
Correct.
so you just get to,
Yes.
you're just at that point of participation.
And
trophy.
I would, at the same time, because I believe in fairness, say I am at the same time perfectly okay with them saying, hey, there is a 12-minute time cap on your first mile in the ruck run at the beginning. You must complete it in under that time. That is what we consider to be a reasonable effort.
Just
12,
so they
15,
show-
whatever it is. And,
Yeah.
and that's showing that you're giving it a hard effort, a reasonably hard effort to continue on. And if you don't, you also could take last in the
Yeah,
competition.
and that looks good on Rogue too, because then they have that mindset about every event. It's not
It's
just the really outstanding heavy bar or whatever.
Correct.
It's every event. We give
You
the
have to
same
be good at each of
consideration
these
to.
things.
Yeah.
And that is now saying that, okay, we can't control the pace you pick in the entire workout, but I know in the first mile leg, you're going to have to push. Otherwise, you don't continue on.
Do you think
Yep.
Rogue is responsible in any way for, again, in potentially inviting an athlete who has a history of back problems and may not want to do like, and maybe those were conversations had that we weren't privy to say, hey, we're going to invite you, and say, okay, that's fine, but if it gets
yeah.
programmed this way, I may not be able to participate in that event.
I
It
mean,
can
it was
be-
their choice. It might
It
not
can be for a
necessarily-
variety of different reasons. Yeah. Like somebody could have an injury going in that they didn't have previously. Somebody could just not be prepared for it. It could come up and you'll be like, shit, I didn't train for this or whatever. I don't know. It's just, if you're looking at a competition as the totality of work, and one of the things that it takes to perform over the weekend is to be durable enough to tolerate the volume, which is why games training looks different than somebody's open and quarterfinal season training, then you also have to be looking at like the volume of work people are doing. Like there's a reason why somebody doing a workout at home from Saturday's training might do better than somebody in the competition. It's not because they're fitter necessarily. It might be because they didn't do 3 events prior and be under these conditions at that time of day with that stress level. All of those things are factors. If somebody's going into an event with less stress than the other person, then they're going to be in a different position.
Even though the presentation is good, which I think is a benefit to CrossFit as a sport, because half the time people don't know what's going on. So when you present things as a race, a sprint to the finish, that's fantastic. But I think there is something to be said that there were multiple events in the competition where in order for you to place well, you had to do more. You had to tax your body more. And I would just do away with that in general. I like, how can you have any of that program? Because ultimately somebody who gets further in that event, or you need to have it where it's like a maximum of 3. But it just seems like it's set up in a way that just does not benefit the person who wins that event.
It's weird to me that we have a sport like weightlifting or powerlifting, but weightlifting's cleaner, that has years and years and years, dozens of years of history of performing competitions to find max load in a certain way, and we have yet to adopt that format.
Yeah, like, there's a reason that you couldn't drop the bar.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's a reason that 3 attempts, and there's a reason that the bar only goes up, and there's a reason that little rules about, changing weights and these different things all play in, because it creates a sport that's very smooth moving for weightlifting. And I think that's something we can do in different ways. There's a reason that if you go to the national events for weightlifting, that they have a first, second, third, or an A, B, C, D stage and whatnot for people that come in with entry totals at different levels. Like this is not my idea. Somebody else mentioned this, but I'll steal it because I think it's a great idea. But like, you could have asked everybody coming into the competition for an opening number for an opener, that they might have the option to change at a later date. But basically what you do is you take those and you separate them into 4 separate platforms based off of their opening number. So if you're the lightest 5 opening numbers submitted, you go on this stage. If you're the next 5, you go on this stage, and this stage. And now you can have the bar start at a certain weight. All of these people maybe get 5 attempts. The bar just goes up from whatever that opener was, and everybody has an opportunity to hit their max load.
Or you do it like the Bella Complex from a couple of years ago, where there were even more platforms than that, and maybe 2 heats, and each person had like 2 or 3 attempts to establish.
It was 2 attempts.
2 attempts. Yeah, and you do that.
I think there were multiple ways to do it, and I think unfortunately the way they chose to do it was by far the worst way to do it, unfortunately.
And I think it was done that way, piggybacking off the fact that both the sandbag clean from the games and the log from last year at Rogue were hugely successful and exciting. And so I think having that same idea of multiple platforms that peels down to a center stage was exciting. I think it's highlighted as a bad idea more because it was a deadlift, and because of how many reps were done, and because of how small the jumps were, and because of how many people that you had separate out to be like, oh fuck, these 4 people did another 3 jumps for no reason, where none of them got out, but everybody else was already out, and this is just useless work. Yeah. And
also just that I mean, on the women's side specifically, obviously, once you got to 380, the fact that it went by 5 pounds each was just
punishment. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all right, moving on.
I said we weren't going to talk about that.
I know.
Sunday, I personally loved that Hulk. I didn't love that the event had to change so much, but I understand that changing. I loved that Hulk Hands was in the rain. I thought it looked fucking cool. Yeah, the fact that you pick up the fat bells, and as people did their first clean and jerk, there was water pouring out of the bells from it. Was awesome. I hated that they did step back lunges. I did not like that they did not have to go up and down the hill. But I just thought the idea of like biking and doing grunt work with the dumbbells in the rain was just like very traditional sport-esque.
Wait, they had to drag it up the hill?
They did have to drag it up the hill. This event, they kept it up the hill.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, they did still. Wrong event.
What's the next one?
Get out of here, Sorka.
I really did, and I really enjoyed this event. I thought it was a really nasty event, but I thought it was good. the rain obviously was incredibly uncomfortable for everybody, but that's all right. I agree with you. The reverse lunges were, I mean, they did what they had to do. I thought that was fine. I really liked the double fat bell ground overhead. I thought was a super fun implementation. I like those. And I thought it was a grindy workout. I thought it was nasty, and a lot of fun. And it obviously shook up the leaderboard a little bit, especially on the women's side, which was fun to see. It was one of those workouts that if you didn't have your big boy and girl pants on, it will punch you in the face. So it was a good one. I enjoyed it.
What was it, Dakota? Tell me your thoughts on this.
So this is really like one of the workouts that I didn't get a whole lot of chance to watch, just based on the timing for me. I saw a bunch of clips of it. I agree. Like I saw some of the shots of the water pouring out. I mean, I sent you that video. That video of Chandler sliding down the hill was, absolutely epic. So more like some of the, Instagrammy things I got to see. I don't know if you guys saw or heard about the bike issue. I don't know if it was battery issue or just because it was that bike or the rain or whatever it might've been, but there was potentially some bikes that were having, reader error. And,
I mean, if you're going to do an event in the rain and you have anything that has batteries, you're going to have to worry about that. So,
Yep.
I think, obviously, not in the rain, being able to do an actual walking lunge to see distance covered, that would have been a really nasty and really cool workout. Also, not having done as much hinging the day before, I think that would have been a really cool workout. I think the intensity was dropped because a lot of people were pretty fucked up going into it. And I also think the rain threw a lot of people off. But this was one of the workouts on paper that I was most excited for going in. I thought it was a really cool, really tough workout.
Agreed.
Yeah, the fact that they were using those bells, I was definitely, I thought that was pretty interesting.
The event 8 was the biggest letdown of the weekend for me.
I have the biggest problem with event 8.
Absolute biggest letdown.
Yeah.
Why don't you just fucking do 300 feet of handstand walking for time?
It was awful. It was honestly the pegboard, making the double pegboard with the box jumps and then the run all the way up the hill. I thought was a really cool event. I just have I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased. I have a major problem with one. You're replacing a movement like a pegboard with a movement that has absolutely nowhere near the same stimulus or muscle system. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. And now you've also cut out the run up the hill, and the run was inconsequential. It made no sense. I just had a massive problem with the workout. I think they could have come up with something considerably better. And now you've gotten rid of rope climbs and pegboards, which were both upper body pulling movements. One, you've just taken them out, and the second you've replaced with a handstand walk.
Yeah.
It was terrible. I agree. This was the worst event of the weekend by far.
Why do they always drop? Like, maybe this is a stupid question. I know athlete safety is important, but you could argue that any of these things done in the rain, you could slip. You could something that the whole cans could slip out of your hands. So why not just keep it and have a padded?
Anyway. Well, on a pegboard, you're suspended 10 feet in the air with plexiglass.
But you could fall onto not to the ground, but to the padded thing that we see at the games. Anybody can fall from 10 feet onto that and be fine.
I'm okay with taking out pegboards because of the rain. That makes sense to me. It doesn't make me happy. What makes me unhappy is choosing to go from a strict pulling to an inverted skill workout instead. That really was entirely dependent on handstand walk capacity. And it brings up this thought of like, why is handstand walking the only gymnastic skill that we test in a single modality like state?
And it just doesn't go with the CrossFit method even, right? Like scale it, right? If we're saying that the pegboard is the hard movement, what's the scaled version of a pegboard? I mean, I would hate to call it just a dumbed down version, but
what do you do, like strict pull-ups?
I had said the two things I would have loved to see were either that they strap the ropes that they had from the rope climb event onto sleds and you do a hand over hand pull. So it's still pulling, but you can do it. And it's just like, it would just be like nasty. You can see it moving across the field. It doesn't matter if it's raining. Or you do burpee pull-ups in the rain. You would just fucking embrace the mud. You get super dirty and you deal with it. And that would have made it, again, a different stimulus, but at least it's a fitness workout at that point. This became 500 feet of handstand walking for time.
Yeah.
With almost nothing in between. And it was, and I don't, again, this is not a slight on the gymnast. Congrats to everybody that's phenomenal at handstand walking. But the leaderboard showed who was the best, fastest handstand walkers on either side, and that was it.
Yeah, I agree. This was I thought this was a throwaway. I didn't like this event at all. But
and I'm self-admittedly biased on that workout. But it's like, it shows you had an event that was intended to be strict pulling limited, right? In that event, Kyra was going into that being like, I can be a top 10. Instead, it's a handstand walk workout, and she goes into that being like, I hope I'm not dead last. And she did take last in it. So that's like a complete flip in what the intended stimulus was for a competition that you assume they looked at the 9 events and said, this is how we need to balance this out.
Yeah, I mean, similarly with Alex and Ricky, that the pegboard event was an event I thought they both could win.
Right. For all four of our athletes were stoked for pegboards.
Yeah. And now Ricky and Bailey did well. I think they were both top 10 on the handstand walk.
Yep.
Alex took a 12th, and look, she looked fine, but she's the handstand walk is I mean, compared to ex-gymnasts, there's just no way to, So anyway, I just thought it was, in my opinion, I just thought, how do you go from 2 pegboards to a 50-foot handstand walk? Like, it didn't make any sense, right? Like, it just, to me, you've still got to try to be within the realm of what you were trying to test before. So whatever movements you're going to put in, I felt like they just didn't correlate well. I don't know. I just thought it was a bad decision.
So I don't know how much either of you guys know this, but apparently the final, I don't know about anything else that may have changed in it, but the final was supposed to be heavier. The final was originally written as 255, 175.
Oh.
And I don't know why they changed the weight. I don't understand. And if they changed it because people were complaining about being fucked up from all the hinging, then that's now 2 workouts that they changed in the middle of the weekend because people complained about things being challenging, which tells me either 1, they're just far too soft and too subject to people's opinions, or 2, nobody fucking paid attention or tested this weekend.
Well, I think if you go back to Saturday and you alter those workouts a little bit, you could have kept then there would have been no issue with 255 and 175, right? Like, if you change the whole dynamic and the way that the deadlift workout was presented, you don't make it a ladder, you make it 3 attempts or whatever it is. And then that workout earlier in the day with 120 snatches, what if you make that 7 rounds instead of 10 rounds? Mm-hmm. It's not going to change. It's not going to make a difference. The people who won the 10 rounds still going to win the 7 rounds. So I think you could have done that, and I think you could have decreased the volume of pulling on day 3, and then you could have made this heavier, which I agree with you. I think heavier would have been better.
And I don't have an issue with the workout. I thought the workout was cool. I actually thought the very small stage style was pretty exciting. If there was an easier way for more people to watch it from there, I didn't hate it at all. However, I just find it interesting that they changed the event. The time cap was initially 14 minutes. It was supposed to be heavier, and it turned into a fairly, moderate to heavy barbell sprint, essentially.
Yeah. I actually would have loved to seen the workout written the first 3 rounds at 225, 155, the next 2 rounds at 255, 175, and then the final round at 285, 205.
Yeah.
I think that would have been awesome. I would have loved to have seen that. I think it would have changed things immensely. I also would have liked to have seen the double unders be done with a heavy rope. I think that would have made things interesting as well. As opposed to
yep.
That's just me.
I mean, you see 225, 155 is light enough that people who are very fit can get through it well. And you could see that as you got to the end, there were very strong athletes that did well. There were very fit athletes that did well, but you could see on the last 5 clean and jerks where some people were kind of at their limit of strength and what they had left. If you make that 175, you create a little bit more separation in that, which I think is exciting. But I thought it was a cool event. It's a cool finish. Having a finale have, like 5 seconds separating people, 3 seconds separating people is fun. It's kind of a bummer to have only 5 on the floor, so you can't see some of those races. Like Alex and Emma Carey were in a race for 5th spot, but they were in 5th and 6th. They're in different heats, so you don't see them going against each other. You don't get that little bit of a rivalry. Same thing on the men's side. You had some of that, so that was a bummer. That's nobody's fault, but those things would have been exciting.
Yeah, I agree. But overall, listen, I mean, Rogue is what Rogue is. I still think it was a fun event, and I think obviously the athletes enjoy it. I think without question, it's a tough event to have so close to the games. I think a lot of the games athletes after this event are like, oh my God, I need another 2 weeks. I need another 3 weeks, So it is a challenge. I would love for them to look at the volume in the future. I think that you could do an event that has 7 workouts over 3 days as opposed to 9 over 4 and still, and still get what you want out of it.
I mean, you could have that many events. Like there was 0 low load, high volume squatting.
Yeah.
The entire weekend. Take out one hinge event, put in wall balls or overhead squats or pistols. It can still be hard, but it balances out what is hard about it, and you don't have the same issues.
Yeah, and then
Right? Like,
and then just the volume of hinging and
yeah,
pulling.
that's what I mean. Like,
yeah, it was brutal, especially for those people who got deep into the deadlift. I mean, my God, you look at the amount of work that they did compared to the people that didn't. It's crazy. It's a different weekend. I mean,
Yeah.
It really is. It's a different weekend. So anyway, yeah. But listen, at the end of the day, I was super stoked, obviously, to have, Ricky started the final day in 12th and finished 5th, and that was phenomenal. Made a really big push, that last day, and then obviously Alex closed really strong after event 4, and backed up her performance at the games, which is obviously very exciting. I think really solidified her position in the sport as one of the top 5 females, which is obviously, I mean, that's incredible. And I was super excited for Bailey and Kyra. I mean, listen, Kyra qualifying alone to that field is unbelievable and was a huge, hopefully, I think a huge confidence booster for her as far as the individual scene is concerned. And then Bailey, obviously, I don't think he finished where he wanted to, but I think he will say that, like you mentioned before, he didn't come in training the way that he did prior to the games. And if you look at some of his finishes, they were still really good finishes. And I think he's poised to have another phenomenal year. And I think if we look at that Oceania region, I mean, he, Jay, and Ricky have established themselves as like the 3 standouts in the division. I mean, you're talking about 3 guys now that are all, top 20, top 15 in the world, not just in that division, which is awesome.
For sure.
So yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting for what we have coming up. Sure.
Yeah. I think you have to, you look at the competition and yes, you can look at your finish, and that has one impact on, how you feel about it and what you see going forward. But the second is like, and this is not unique to our athletes, this is for every athlete, is you can't just go by your points total and decide whether things are successful or not relative to your expectations. Because when I went through this with Kyra, like, okay, she finished in 18th place, right? If event 8 is peg boards instead of handstand walks, she probably picks up another 40 points, which changes something pretty drastically. If there are rope climbs in the duel, I feel confident she gets through the first round at least, which means it's top 15 instead of a bottom 5 finish in this, right? If, all of these little things, it's like, okay, if we can just, the killer cage workout, she did well on it, but they only scored one entire length as 1 rep. And then what they took as a tiebreaker was your first round score. So it actually rewarded people who came out hot and blew up. Kyra started slower, was on the final rep, passed 3 women who had a better tiebreak time than her, and so she loses points to that. That's another 15 points. So it's not a way to say boo-hoo, like we should have finished better, but it's a way to say like, okay, if we're evaluating fitness, we were very small margins away from a top 15 at Rogue, which is a massive success. And that's the way I look at it in terms of going forward. It's like, cool, the things that we think that we were good at, you're still really good at, even relative to a games field. You have 3 top 8 finishes against the best games women in the world. Outside of that, we have a couple of things to really work on and some other stuff where we get really good data going forward. And I think that's where you learn. It's not the outcome and just seeing that 18th or seeing a 5th or seeing this. It's like Alex was 1 or 2 events looking different or one equipment execution away from being on the podium. Like that's the way you look at those things, you know, and that's what makes the sport exciting for our whole crew. And hopefully for a lot of people is like being able to look at those micro adjustments and seeing where the progress can be made.
Yep, I completely agree. Yeah, a lot of good stuff, a lot of good nuggets to take from it, and looking forward to building, you know, off of that for sure. Cool. What do we got going up? What do we got coming up over the next few weeks?
Next up, we got
Legends.
We got Legends. We have Desert City, which we have one team of our females, Carson, Ava, and Skylar doing. CJ Gerald's competing elite men. Kendall Gilmore is sliding into an elite women's spot.
Oh, that's a surprise.
Women.
I didn't hear that one.
It'll be her first elite competition. I'm actually super excited to see how she does there.
She's a teenager, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know
17-year-old competing in teens for another year, but wanted to give it a run. Then we have Legends. We have Dubai. We have Fit Fest. We have Down Under Championship. It's a busy winter for us.
And I know that Legends is one we've done for the last few years, but for me, like in particular, looking forward into the CrossFit season, this is going to be a really big one because they're hosting what they're referring to as the CrossFit Games Championship for the Masters division. So whether you're pro or anti or not sure, I mean, at the end of the day, you really have to just wait and see how it unfolds. And so I'm hoping that this is going to be a little bit of a representation and might be, good for those people that were already a little on the fence about it. They might see that, they take care of the Masters, they get some sponsorships, they're at a new venue, and hopefully it's going to be more, positive.
Looking forward. They're hosting it at ASU. What weekend is it again? Is it the same one as Dubai?
It is the second weekend of December. It's 8th, 9th, 10th.
So same weekend as Dubai. Yep. Big things. I'm sure we'll do another episode. Well, we somebody will kill us if we don't do another episode prior to then. So maybe we will do one after after Desert City, middle of November, right before the holidays. A little bit of a preview for those upcoming competitions for December.
Perfect.
Love it. As always, thank you to our pretty man in the back, Mr. Alex Sroka, popping his head on from time to time to give his political views. Just kidding. Never his political views, just his views on the competition.
He says thanks, by the way. He says thanks.
I don't. I have nothing else.
Yeah, that's it. We're done.